The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The appearance of our visitor was a surprise to me, since I'd expected a typical country practitioner. He was a very tall, thin man, with a long nose like a beak, which jutted out between two keen grey eyes, set closely together and sparkling brightly from behind a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. "I came to see you, Mr. Holmes, because I am suddenly confronted with a most serious and extraordinary problem." "I have in my pocket a manuscript," said Dr. James Mortimer. "I observed it as you entered the room," said Holmes. "It is an old manuscript. The exact date is 1742. Dr. Mortimer drew it from his breast pocket. This family paper was committed to my care by Sir Charles Baskerville, whose sudden and tragic death some 3 months ago created so much excitement in Devonshire. I may say that I was his personal friend as well as his medical attendant. He was a strong-minded man, sir, shrewd, practical, and as unimaginative as myself. Yet he took this document very seriously, and his mind was prepared for just such an end as did eventually overtake him." Holmes leaned back in his chair, placed his fingertips together, and closed his eyes with an air of resignation. Dr. Mortimer turned the manuscript to the light and began to read it. "Of the origin of the Hound of the Baskervilles, there have been many statements. Yet as I come in direct line from Hugo Baskerville, and as I had the story from my father, who also had it from his, I have set it down with all belief that it occurred even as is here set forth. Know, then, that in the time of the Great Rebellion, this manor of Baskerville was held by Hugo of that name, nor can it be gainsaid that he was a most wild, profane, and godless man. It chanced that this Hugo came to love the daughter of a yeoman who held lands near the Baskerville estate. But the young maiden would ever avoid him, for she feared his evil name. So it came to pass that one Michaelmas, this Hugo, with 5 or 6 of his idle and wicked companions, stole down upon the farm and carried off the maiden. When they had brought her to the hall, the maiden was placed in an upper chamber, while Hugo and his friends sat down to a long carouse. Now the poor lass did that which might have daunted the bravest or most active man, for by the aid of the growth of ivy which covered and still covers the south wall, she came down from under the eaves, and so homeward across the moor, there being 3 leagues betwixt the hall and her father's farm. It chanced that some little time later, Hugo found the cage empty, and the bird escaped. Then he became as one that hath a devil, for rushing down the stairs he ran from the house, crying to his grooms that they should saddle his black mare and unkennel the pack, and giving the hounds a kerchief of the maid's, he swung them to the line, and so off full cry in the moonlight over the moor. Now for some space his guests were unable to understand all that had been done in such haste, but at length they took horse and started in pursuit. They had gone a mile or 2 when they passed one of the night shepherds upon the moorlands, and they cried to him to know if he had seen the hunt. And the man said that he had indeed seen the unhappy maiden, with hounds upon her track. "But I have seen more than that," said he, "for Hugo Baskerville passed me upon his black mare, and there ran mute behind him such a hound of hell as God forbid should ever be at my heels." So the drunken squires rode onwards, but soon there came a sound of galloping across the moor, and the black mare dabbled with white froth when passed with trailing bridle and empty saddle. Then the revellers rode close together, for a great fear was on them. They came at last upon the hounds. These, though known for their valour, were whimpering in a cluster at the head of a deep dip or goyle, as we call it upon the moor, some slinking away and some, with starting hackles and staring eyes, gazing down the narrow valley before them. The company had come to a halt. 3 of them rode forward down the goyle. Now it opened into a broad space. The moon was shining bright, and there in the centre lay the unhappy maid where she had fallen, dead. But it was not the sight of her body, nor yet was it the body of Hugo Baskerville lying near her, which raised the hair upon the heads of these three roisterers. But it was that standing over Hugo and plucking at his throat, there stood a foul thing, a great black beast, shaped like a hound, yet larger than any hound that ever mortal eye has ever rested upon. And even as they looked, the thing tore the throat out of Hugo Baskerville, on which, as it turned its blazing eyes and dripping jaws upon them, the three shrieked with fear and rode for dear life. Such is the tale, my sons, of the coming of the Hound, which is said to have plagued the family so sorely ever since. Nor can it be denied that many of the family have been unhappy in their deaths, which have been sudden, bloody, and mysterious. Yet may we shelter ourselves in the infinite goodness of Providence, which would not for ever punish the innocent beyond the third or fourth generation which is threatened in Holy Writ. To that Providence, my sons, I hereby commend you, and I counsel you by way of caution to forbear from crossing the moor in those dark hours when the powers of evil are exalted. This from Hugo Baskerville to his sons Roger and John, Baskerville Hall, 1742. When Dr. Mortimer had finished reading this singular narrative, he pushed his spectacles up on his forehead and stared across at Mr. Sherlock Holmes. "Do you find it interesting?" "To a collector of fairy tales," replied Holmes. Dr. Mortimer drew a folded newspaper out of his pocket. "Now, Mr. Holmes, we will give you something a little more recent. This is the Devon County Chronicle of June the 14th of this year. It is a short account of the facts concerning the death of Sir Charles Baskerville, which occurred a few days before that date. The recent sudden death of Sir Charles Baskerville has cast a gloom over the county. Though Sir Charles had resided at Baskerville Hall for a comparatively short period, his amiability of character and extreme generosity has won the affection and respect of all who have been brought into contact with him. In these days of nouveau riche, it is refreshing to find a case where the scion of an old county family, which has fallen upon evil days, is able to make his own fortune and to bring it back with him to restore the fallen grandeur of his line. Sir Charles, as is well known, made large sums of money in South African speculation. It is only 2 years since he took up his residence at Baskerville Hall, and it is common talk how large were those schemes of reconstruction and improvement which have been interrupted by his death. The circumstances connected with the death of Sir Charles cannot be said to have been entirely cleared up by the inquest, but at least enough has been done to dispose of those rumours to which local superstition has given rise. There is no reason whatever to suspect foul play, or to imagine that death could have been from anything but natural causes. Sir Charles was a widower and childless. In spite of his considerable wealth, he was simple in his personal tastes, and his indoor servants at Baskerville Hall consisted of a married couple named Barrymore. Their evidence, corroborated by that of several friends, tends to show that Sir Charles's health had for some time been impaired, and points especially to some affection of the heart. Dr. James Mortimer, the friend and medical attendant of the deceased, has given evidence to the same effect. The facts of the case are simple. Sir Charles Baskerville was in the habit every night, before going to bed, of walking down the famous yew alley of Baskerville Hall. On the 4th of June, Sir Charles had declared his intention of starting next day for London, and had ordered Barrymore to prepare his luggage. That night he went out as usual for his nocturnal walk, in the course of which he was in the habit of smoking a cigar. He never returned. At 12 o'clock, Barrymore, finding the hall door still open, went in search of his master. The day had been wet, and Sir Charles's footmarks were easily traced down the alley. Halfway down this walk there is a gate which leads out to the moor. There were indications that Sir Charles had stood for some little time here. He then proceeded down the alley, and it was at the far end of it that his body was discovered. One fact, which has not been explained, is the statement of Barrymore that his master's footprints altered their character from the time he passed the moor gate, and that he appeared from thence onwards to have been walking upon his toes. No signs of violence were to be discovered upon Sir Charles's person, and though the doctor's evidence pointed to an almost incredible facial distortion, it was explained that this is a symptom which is not unusual in cases of death from cardiac exhaustion. This explanation was borne out by the post-mortem examination, which showed long-standing organic disease, and the coroner's jury returned a verdict in accordance with the medical evidence. It is understood that the next of kin is Mr. Henry Baskerville, if he be still alive, the son of Sir Charles Baskerville's younger brother. The young man, when last heard of, was in America, and inquiries are being instituted with a view to informing him of his good fortune. Dr. Mortimer refolded his paper and replaced it in his pocket. Those are the public facts, Mr. Holmes, in connection with the death of Sir Charles Baskerville. I must thank you, said Sherlock Holmes, for calling my attention and that of my colleague, Dr. Watson, this with a gracious wave of his hand in my direction, to a case which certainly presents some features of interest. This article, you say, contains all the public facts. It does. Then let me have the private ones. He leaned back, put his fingertips together, and assumed his most impassive and judicial expression. In doing so, said Dr. Mortimer, I'm telling that which I have not confided to anyone. My motive for withholding it from the coroner's inquiry is that a man of science shrinks from placing himself in the public position of seeming to endorse a popular superstition. The moor is very sparsely inhabited, and those who live near each other are thrown very much together. For this reason I saw a good deal of Sir Charles Baskerville, with the exception of Mr. Frankland of Lafter Hall and Mr. Stapleton, the naturalist. There are no other men of education within many miles. Within the last few months it became increasingly plain to me that Sir Charles' nervous system was strained to breaking point. He had taken this legend which I have read to you exceedingly to heart, so much so that, although he would walk in his own grounds, nothing would induce him to go out upon the moor at night. I can well remember driving up to his house in the evening some 3 weeks before the fatal event. He chanced to be at his hall door. I had descended from my gig and was standing in front of him, when I saw his eyes fix themselves over my shoulder and stare past me with an expression of the most dreadful horror. I whisked round, and just had time to catch a glimpse of something which I took to be a large black calf passing at the head of the drive. So excited and alarmed was he that I was compelled to go down to the spot where the animal had been and look around for it. It was gone, however, and the incident appeared to make the worst impression upon his mind. I stayed with him all the evening, and it was on that occasion, to explain the emotion which he had shown, that he confided to my keeping that narrative which I read to you when first I came. It was at my advice that Sir Charles was about to go to London. His heart was, I knew, affected, and the constant anxiety in which he lived, however chimerical the cause of it might be, was evidently having a serious effect upon his health. I thought that a few months among the distractions of town would send him back a new man. Mr. Stapleton, a mutual friend, was of the same opinion. Then, at the last instant, came this terrible catastrophe. On the night of Sir Charles's death, Barrymore the butler, who made the discovery, sent Perkins the groom on horseback to me, and I was able to reach Baskerville Hall within an hour of the event. I checked and corroborated all the facts that were mentioned at the inquest. I followed the footsteps down the yew alley. I saw the spot at the moor gate where he seemed to have waited. I remarked the change in the shape of the prints after that point. I noted that there were no other footsteps save those of Barrymore on the soft gravel. And finally, I carefully examined the body, which had not been touched until my arrival. Sir Charles lay on his face, his arms out, his fingers dug into the ground, and his features convulsed with some strong emotion to such an extent that I could hardly have sworn to his identity. There was certainly no physical injury of any kind, but one false statement was made by Barrymore at the inquest. He said that there were no traces upon the ground round the body. He did not observe any, but I did. Some little distance off, but fresh and clear. "Footprints," said Holmes. "Footprints. A man or a woman's?" "Mr. Holmes, they were the footprints of a gigantic hound." Holmes leaned forward in his excitement, and his eyes had the hard, dry glitter which shot from them when he was keenly interested. "You saw this?" "As clearly as I see you." "How is it that no one else saw it?" "The marks were some 20 yards from the body, and no one gave them a thought. I don't suppose I should have done so had I not known this legend." "What is the alley like?" "There are 2 lines of old yew hedge, 12 feet high and impenetrable. The walk in the centre is about 8 feet across." "Is there anything between the hedges and the walk?" "Yes, there's a strip of grass about 6 feet broad on either side." "I understand that the yew hedge is penetrated at one point by a gate." "Yes, the wicket gate which leads on to the moor." "So that to reach the yew alley one either has to come down it from the house or else to enter it by the moor gate." "There is an exit through a summer house at the far end." "Had Sir Charles reached this?" "No, he lay about 50 yards from it." "Now, tell me, Dr. Mortimer, and this is important. The marks which you saw were on the path and not on the grass, is that correct?" "No marks could show on the grass." "You interest me exceedingly. Another point. Was the wicket gate closed?" "Closed and padlocked." "How high was it?" "About 4 feet high." "Then anyone could have got over it?" "Yes." "And what marks did you see by the wicket gate?" Sir Charles had evidently stood there for 5 or 10 minutes. "How do you know that?" "Because the ash had twice dropped from his cigar." Sherlock Holmes struck his hand against his knee with an impatient gesture. "If only I'd been there!" he cried. "It is evidently a case of extraordinary interest." "There is a realm in which even the most acute and most experienced of detectives is helpless," said the doctor gloomily. "You mean that the thing is supernatural?" "Well, since the tragedy, Mr. Holmes, there have come to my ears several incidents which are hard to reconcile with the settled order of nature." "For example?" asked Holmes. "Well, I find that before the terrible event occurred, several people had seen a creature upon the moor which corresponds with this Baskerville demon, and which could not possibly be an animal known to science. They all agreed that it was a huge creature, luminous, ghastly, and spectral." "And you, a trained man of science, believe it to be supernatural?" "I don't know what to believe." Holmes shrugged his shoulders. "Why have you come to consult me at all? You tell me in the same breath that it is useless to investigate Sir Charles's death, and that you desire me to do it." "I did not say that I desire you to do it." "Then how can I assist you?" "By advising me as to what I should do with Sir Henry Baskerville, who arrives at Waterloo Station." Dr. Mortimer looked at his watch. "In exactly 1 hour and a quarter." "He being the heir?" asked Holmes. "Yes. On the death of Sir Charles we inquired for this young gentleman, and found that he had been farming in Canada. I speak now as a trustee and executor of Sir Charles's will." "There is no other claimant, I presume?" said Holmes. "None. The only other kinsman whom we have been able to trace was Roger Baskerville, the youngest of 3 brothers, of whom poor Sir Charles was the elder. The second brother, who died young, is the father of this lad Henry. The third, Roger, was the black sheep of the family. He came from the old masterful Baskerville strain, and was the very image, they tell me, of the family picture of old Hugo. He made England too hot to hold him, fled to Central America, and died there in 1876 of yellow fever. So young Henry is the last of the Baskervilles. Now, Mr. Holmes, what would you advise me to do with him?" "I recommend, sir, that you say nothing to him at all until I have made up my mind about the matter." "How long will that take?" 24 hours. At 10 o'clock tomorrow, Dr. Mortimer, I will be much obliged to you if you will call upon me here and bring Sir Henry Baskerville with you." I knew that seclusion and solitude were very necessary for my friend in hours of intense mental concentration. I therefore spent the day at my club, and did not return to Baker Street until evening. My first impression as I opened the door was that a fire had broken out, for the room was so filled with smoke that the light of the lamp upon the table was blurred by it. As I entered, however, my fears were set at rest, for it was the acrid fumes of strong, coarse tobacco which took me by the throat and set me coughing. Through the haze I had a vague vision of Holmes in his dressing gown, coiled up in an armchair, with his black clay pipe between his lips. "Caught cold, Watson?" said he. "No, it's this poisonous atmosphere." "Open the window, then." "Where do you think I've been?" he went on. "A fixture in this room? On the contrary, I have been to Devonshire." "Well, in spirit." "Exactly. After you left, I sent down to Stanford's for this ordnance map of the moor, and my spirit has hovered over it all day." He unrolled the map in question and held it over his knee. "Here you have the particular district which concerns us. That is Baskerville Hall in the middle." "With the wood around it?" "Exactly. This is the hamlet of Grimpen, where Dr. Mortimer has his headquarters. Within a radius of 5 miles there are, as you see, only a very few scattered dwellings. Here is Laughter Hall, which was mentioned in the narrative. There is a house indicated here, which may be the residence of the naturalist Stapleton, if I remember right was his name. Here are 2 moorland farmhouses, High Tor and Foul Mire. Here is the local town, Coombe Tracy. Then 14 miles away the great convict prison of Princeton. Between and around these scattered points extends the desolate, lifeless moor." He paused, then fixed me with his eye. "Have you turned the case over in your mind?" "Yes, I've thought a good deal of it in the course of the day." "That change in footprints, for example. What do you make of that?" "Well, Mortimer said the man had walked on tiptoe down that portion of the alley." "Why should a man walk on tiptoe down the alley?" "Why, then?" "He was running, Watson, running desperately, running for his life, running until he burst his heart and fell dead upon his face." "Running from what?" "There lies our problem. Then again, whom was he waiting for that night? And why was he waiting for him in the yew alley rather than in his own house?" "You think he was waiting for someone?" "The man was elderly and infirm. We can understand his taking an evening stroll, but the ground was damp and the night inclement. Is it natural that he should stand for 5 or 10 minutes, as Dr. Mortimer deduced from the cigar ash?" "But he went out every evening." "I think it unlikely that he waited at the moor gate every evening. On the contrary, the evidence is that he avoided the moor. That night he waited there. It was the night before he was to take his departure to London. Things take shape, Watson. It becomes coherent. Might I ask you to hand me my violin, and we will postpone all further thought upon this business until the morning." The clock had just struck 10 when Dr. Mortimer was shown up, followed by the young baronet. The latter was a small, alert, dark-eyed man about 30 years of age, very sturdily built, with thick black eyebrows and a strong, pugnacious face. He wore a ruddy-tinted tweed suit, and had the weather-beaten appearance of one who had spent most of his time in the open air. "Mr. Holmes, this is Sir Henry Baskerville," said Dr. Mortimer. "Good morning, sir. The strange thing is, Mr. Holmes, that if Dr. Mortimer had not proposed coming round to you this morning, I should have come on my own." "Pray take a seat, Sir Henry," said Holmes. "Do I understand you have yourself had some remarkable experience since you arrived in London?" "It was this letter, if you can call it a letter, which reached me this morning." He laid an envelope upon the table. It was of common quality, greyish in colour. The address, Sir Henry Baskerville, Northumberland Hotel, was printed in rough characters, the postmark, Charing Cross, and the date of the posting, the preceding evening. "Who knew that you were going to the Northumberland Hotel?" asked Holmes. "Well, no one could have known. We only decided that after I met Dr. Mortimer." "But Dr. Mortimer was no doubt already stopping there." "No," said Mortimer. "I've been staying with a friend." Someone seems to be very deeply interested in your movements." Out of the envelope, Holmes took a half-sheet of foolscap paper folded into 4. This he opened and spread flat upon the table. Across the middle of it, a single sentence had been formed by the expedient of pasting printed words upon it. It said, "As you value your life, or your reason, keep away from the moor." The word "moor" only was printed in ink. "This very interesting document must have been put together and posted yesterday evening. Have you yesterday's Times, Watson?" It's here in the corner. Might I trouble you for it? The inside page, please, with the leading articles." He glanced swiftly over it, running his eyes up and down the columns. "Capital article this on free trade. Permit me to give you an extract from it. You may be cajoled into imagining that your own special trade or your own industry will be encouraged by a protective tariff, but it stands to reason that such legislation must in the long run keep away wealth from the country, diminish the value of our imports, and lower the general conditions of life in this land." "What do you think of that, Watson?" cried Holmes in high glee. "Well, it seems to me we've got a bit off the trail so far as that note is concerned. And yet, my dear Watson, there is a very close connection. The note is extracted out of the newspaper. You, your, life, reason, value, keep away from the... Don't you see now whence these words have been taken?" "By thunder, you're right. Well, if that isn't smart!" cried Sir Henry. Holmes bowed. The detection of types is one of the most elementary branches of knowledge to the special expert in crime, though I confess that once when I was very young I confused the Leeds Mercury with the Western Morning News. But a Times leader is entirely distinctive, and these words could have been taken from nothing else. As it was done yesterday, the strong probability was we should find the words in yesterday's issue. "Why is the word "moor" written by hand?" Sir Henry asked. "Because he could not find it in print. The other words were all simple and might be found in any issue, but "moor" would be less common." "Why, of course, that would explain it. Have you read anything else in this message, Mr. Holmes?" said Sir Henry. "The address, you observe, is printed in rough characters, but I'm almost certain that this address has been written in an hotel." "How in the world can you say that?" "If you examine it carefully, you will see that both the pen and the ink have given the writer trouble. The pen has spluttered twice in a single word and has run dry 3 times in a short address, showing that there was very little ink in the bottle. Now, a private pen or ink bottle is seldom allowed to be in such a state, and the combination of the two must be quite rare. But you know the hotel ink and the hotel pen, where it is rare to get anything else. Yes, I have very little hesitation in saying that could we examine the waste-paper baskets of the hotels round Charing Cross until we found the remains of the mutilated Times leader, we could lay our hands straight upon the person who sent this singular message. Hello. What's this?" He was carefully examining the foolscap upon which the words were pasted, holding it only an inch or 2 from his eyes. "Well?" said I. "Nothing," said he, throwing it down. "I think we've drawn as much as we can from this curious letter. And now, Sir Henry, has anything else of interest happened to you since you've been in London?" "Well, it depends upon what you think is worth reporting." "I think anything out of the ordinary routine of life well worth reporting." Sir Henry smiled. "I don't know much of British life yet, for I spent nearly all my time in the States and in Canada, but I hope that to lose one of your boots is not part of the ordinary routine of life over here." "You've lost one of your boots?" "Well, mislaid anyhow. I put them both outside my door last night, and there was only one in the morning. I could get no sense out of the chap who cleans them. The worst of it is that I only bought the pair last night in the Strand, and I've never had them on." "If you've never worn them, why did you put them out to be cleaned?" "They were tan boots, and had never been varnished. That's why I put them out." "Then I understand that on your arrival in London yesterday you went out at once and bought a pair of boots?" "Why, I did a good deal of shopping. Dr. Mortimer here went round with me." Not even Holmes could solve the riddle of the boot, so we moved on to more serious matters. Mortimer repeated for Sir Henry everything which he had told us the previous afternoon. Sir Henry Baskerville listened with the deepest attention. "Wow, I seem to have come into an inheritance with a vengeance," said he, when the long narrative had finished. "Of course, I've heard of the Hound ever since I was in the nursery. It's the pet story of the family, though I never thought of taking it seriously before. But as to my uncle's death, well, you don't seem quite to have made up your mind whether it's a case for a policeman or a clergyman." "Precisely," said Holmes. "But the practical point which we now have to decide, Sir Henry, is whether or not it is advisable for you to go to Baskerville Hall." "Why should I not go?" "There seems to be danger." "I've hardly had time to think over all that you've told me," said Sir Henry. "It's 11:30 now, and I'm going back right away to my hotel. Suppose you and your friend Dr. Watson come round and lunch with us at 2. Is that convenient to you, Watson?" "Perfectly." "Then you may expect us. Shall I have a cab called?" "I'd prefer to walk." "I'll join you in a walk with pleasure," said his companion. We heard the steps of our visitors descend the stair and the bang of the front door. In an instant, Holmes had changed from the languid dreamer to the man of action. "Your hat and boots, Watson, quick! Not a moment to lose!" He rushed into his room in his dressing gown and was back again in a few seconds in a frock coat. We hurried down the stairs and into the street. Dr. Mortimer and Baskerville were visible about 200 yards ahead of us in the direction of Oxford Street. "Shall I run on and stop them?" "Not for the world, my dear Watson. I'm perfectly satisfied with your company, if you will tolerate mine." He quickened his pace until we had decreased the distance which divided us by about half. Then, still keeping 100 yards behind, we followed into Oxford Street and so down Regent Street. Once our friend stopped and stared into a shop window, upon which Holmes did the same. An instant afterwards, he gave a little cry of satisfaction, and following the direction of his eager eyes, I saw that a hansom cab with a man inside, which had halted on the other side of the street, was now walking slowly onwards again. "There's our man, Watson. Come along. We'll have a good look at him if we can do no more." As he stepped off the pavement, I became aware of a bushy black beard and a pair of piercing eyes turned upon us through the side window of the cab. Instantly, the trap door at the top flew up. Something was screamed at the driver, and the cab flew madly off down Regent Street. "There now," said Holmes bitterly. "Was ever such bad luck and such bad management too? Watson, Watson, if you are an honest man, you will now record this also and set it down against my successes." "Who was that man?" "I have not an idea," he replied. "A spy?" "Well, it was evident from what we've heard that Baskerville has been very closely shadowed by someone since he's been in town. If they had followed him the first day, I argued that they would follow him also the second." "What a pity we did not get the cab number," said I. "My dear Watson, clumsy as I've been, you surely do not seriously imagine that I neglected to get the number. 2704 is our man." He turned into one of the district messenger offices, where he was warmly greeted by the manager. "Ah, Wilson, I see you have not forgotten the little case in which I had the good fortune to help you." "No, sir, indeed I have not. You saved my good name and perhaps my life." "My dear fellow, you exaggerate." "I have some recollection, Wilson, that you had among your boys a lad named Cartwright, who showed some ability during the investigation." "Yes, sir, he's still with us." "Could you ring him up? Thank you." He turned to me. "We will direct the boy Cartwright towards the wastepaper bins of Charing Cross, find out by wire the identity of the cabman, number 2704, and then we will drop into one of the Bond Street picture galleries and fill in the time until we are due at the hotel." "Sir Henry Baskerville is expecting you," said the clerk. "He asked me to show you up at once when you came." As we came round the top of the stairs, we ran up against Sir Henry Baskerville himself. His face was flushed with anger, and he held an old dusty black boot in one of his hands. "I can take a joke with the best, Mr. Holmes, but they've gone a bit over the mark this time. Still looking for your boot? Yes, sir, and I mean to find it. But surely you said that it was a new brown boot. So it was, sir, and now it's an old black one. What? You don't mean to say... Last night they took one of my new brown ones, and today they've sneaked one of my old black pair. Well, have you got it? Speak out, man, and don't stand staring. An agitated German waiter had appeared upon the scene. It shall be found, sir. I promise you that. If you will have a little patience, it will be found. Dr. Mortimer joined us. We had a pleasant luncheon, in which little was said of the business which had brought us together. It was in the private sitting-room, to which we afterwards repaired, that Holmes asked Sir Henry what were his intentions. To go to Baskerville Hall, he replied. And when? At the end of the week. On the whole, said Holmes, I think your decision is a wise one. I have ample evidence that you were followed this morning from my house. Dr. Mortimer started violently. Followed? By whom? That, unfortunately, is what I cannot tell you. Have you among your neighbours or acquaintances on Dartmoor any man with a black, full beard? No, let me see, said Mortimer. Why, yes, Barrymore. Sir Charles's butler is a man with a full black beard. Ha! Where is Barrymore? Asked Holmes. He's in charge of the hall. We had best ascertain if he is really there, or if by any possibility he might be in London. How can you do that? Give me a telegraph form. We shall say, is all ready for arrival of Sir Henry. That will do. Addressed to Mr. Barrymore, Baskerville Hall. Which is the nearest telegraph office to Baskerville Hall? Grimpen? Very good. We will send a second wire to the postmaster at Grimpen, saying, Telegram to Mr. Barrymore to be delivered into his own hand. If absent, please return wire to Sir Henry Baskerville, Northumberland Hotel. That should let us know before evening whether Barrymore is at his post in Devonshire or not. That's so, said Sir Henry. By the way, Dr. Mortimer, who is this Barrymore, anyhow? He is the son of the old caretaker who is dead. They have looked after the hall for 4 generations now. One more question, Dr. Mortimer, said Holmes. Supposing that anything happened to our young friend here, who would inherit the estate? Well, since Roger Baskerville, Sir Charles's younger brother, died unmarried, the estate would descend to the Desmonds, who are distant cousins. James Desmond is an elderly clergyman in Westmoreland. Have you met Mr. James Desmond? Yes. He once came down to visit Sir Charles. He is a man of venerable appearance and of saintly life. I remember that he refused to accept any settlement from Sir Charles, though he pressed it upon him. I see. Well, Sir Henry, I am of one mind with you as to the advisability of your going down to Devonshire. There is only one provision which I must make. You must take with you someone, a trusty man, who will always be by your side. Or is it possible you could come yourself, Mr. Holmes? With my extensive practice, and with the constant appeals which reach me from many quarters, it's impossible for me to be absent from London for an indefinite time. Who would you recommend, then? Holmes laid his hand upon my arm. If my friend Watson would undertake it, there is no man who is better worth having at your side when you are in a tight place. Well, I will come with pleasure, said I. We had risen to depart when Sir Henry gave a cry of triumph, and diving into one of the corners of the room, he drew a brown boot from under a cabinet. My missing boot, he cried. Or one of them, anyway. May all our difficulties vanish as easily, said Sherlock Holmes. But it is a very singular thing, Dr. Mortimer remarked. I searched this room carefully before lunch. And so did I, said Sir Henry. Every inch of it. There was certainly no boot in it then. Holmes sat in silence in the cab as we drove back to Baker Street. All afternoon and late into the evening he sat lost in tobacco and thought. Just before dinner, 2 telegrams were handed in. The first ran, "Have just heard that Barrymore is at the Hall. Baskerville." The second, "Visited 23 hotels as directed, but sorry to report unable to trace cut sheet of times. Cartwright." There go 2 of my threads, Watson. There is nothing more stimulating than a case where everything goes against you. We must cast round for another scent. We still have the cabman who drove the spy. Exactly. I've wired to get his name and address from the official registry. I should not be surprised if this were an answer to my question. The ring at the bell proved to be something even more satisfactory than an answer, however, for the door opened and a rough-looking fellow entered, who was evidently the man himself. "I got a message from head office that a gent at this address had been inquiring for 2704, said he. "What was it you wanted, sir?" Sherlock Holmes wasted no time. "Tell me about the fare who came and watched this house at 10 o'clock this morning and afterwards followed the 2 gentlemen down Regent Street." The man looked surprised and a little embarrassed. "Well, the gentleman told me he was a detective and that I was to say nothing about him to anyone." "My good fellow, this is a very serious business, and you may find yourself in a pretty bad position if you try to hide anything from me. You say that your fare told you he was a detective?" "Yes, he did." "When did he say this?" When he left me." "Did he say anything more?" "He mentioned his name." Holmes cast a swift glance of triumph at me. "Oh, he mentioned his name, did he? That was imprudent. What was his name?" "His name," said the cabman, "was Mr. Sherlock Holmes." Never have I seen my friend more completely taken aback than by the cabman's reply. For an instant he sat in silent amazement. Then he burst into a hearty laugh. "A touch, Watson, an undeniable touch. I feel a foil as quick and supple as my own. He got home upon me very prettily that time." "So his name was Sherlock Holmes, was it?" "Yes, sir." Upon the appointed day, Mr. Sherlock Holmes drove with me to the station and gave me his last parting injunction and advice. "I will not bias your mind by suggesting theories or suspicions, Watson. I wish you simply to report facts in the fullest possible manner to me, and you can leave me to do the theorizing." Mortimer and Baskerville had already secured a first-class carriage and were waiting for me. "Did you get the other boot?" Holmes asked Sir Henry. "No, sir. It is gone forever." "Indeed. That is very interesting. Well, good-bye," he added as the train began to glide down the platform. "Bear in mind, Sir Henry, one of the phrases in that legend which Dr. Mortimer has read to us, and avoid the more in those hours of darkness when the powers of evil are exalted." The journey was a swift and pleasant one, and I spent it in making the more intimate acquaintance of my 2 companions. In a very few hours the brown earth had become ruddy, brick had changed to granite, and red cows grazed in well-hedged fields, where the lush grasses spoke of a richer, if damper, climate. Young Baskerville stared eagerly out of the window and cried aloud with delight as he recognized the familiar features of the Devon scenery. "I was a boy in my teens at the time of my father's death, and have never seen the Hall, for my father lived in a little cottage on the south coast. Thence I went straight to a friend in America. I tell you, it's all new to me, and I'm as keen as possible to see the moor." "Are you? Then your wish is easily granted, for there is your first sight of it," said Dr. Mortimer, pointing out of the carriage window. There rose in the distance a grey, melancholy hill, with a strange, jagged summit, dim and vague, like some fantastic landscape in a dream. Baskerville sat for a long time, his eyes fixed upon it. There he sat, with his tweed suit and his American accent, in the corner of a prosaic railway carriage, and yet as I looked at his dark and expressive face, I felt more than ever how true a descendant he was of that long line of high-blooded, fiery, and masterful men. The train pulled up at Coombe Tracy Station, and we all descended. Outside, a wagonette with a pair of horses was waiting. I was surprised to observe that by the gate there stood 2 soldiery men in dark uniforms, who leaned upon their short rifles and glanced keenly at us as we passed. The coachman, Perkins, a hard-faced, gnarled little fellow, saluted Sir Henry Baskerville, and in a few minutes we were flying swiftly down the broad white road. Soon rolling pastures curved upwards on either side of us, but behind the peaceful and sunlit countryside there rose ever, dark against the evening sky, the long, gloomy curve of the moor, broken by the jagged and sinister hills. "Hello!" cried Dr. Mortimer. "What is this?" A steep curve of heath-clad land, an outlying spur of the moor, lay in front of us. On the summit was a mounted soldier, his rifle poised ready over his forearm. He was watching the road along which we travelled. "What is this, Perkins?" asked Dr. Mortimer. "There's a convict escaped from Princetown, sir. He's been out 3 days now, and the warders watch every road and every station, but there's no sight of him yet. The farmers about here don't like it, sir, and that's a fact. This is a man who would stick at nothing." "Who is he, then?" "It is Selden, the Notting Hill murderer." I remembered the case well, for it was one in which Holmes had taken an interest on account of the peculiar ferocity of the crime and the wanton brutality which had marked all the actions of the assassin. The commutation of his death sentence had been due to some doubts as to his complete sanity, so atrocious was his conduct. The road in front of us grew bleaker and wilder over huge russet and olive slopes, sprinkled with giant boulders. Suddenly, we looked down into a cup-like depression, patched with stunted oaks and firs which had been twisted and bent by the fury of years of storm. 2 high narrow towers rose over the trees. The driver pointed with his whip. "Baskerville Hall," said he. A few minutes later we had reached the lodge gates, a maze of fantastic tracery in wrought iron, with weather-beaten pillars on either side, blotched with lichen, and surmounted by the boar's heads of the Baskervilles. The avenue opened into a broad expanse of turf, and the house lay before us. In the fading light, I could see that the centre was a heavy block of building from which a porch projected. The whole front was draped in ivy. From this central block rose the twin towers. A dull light shone through the heavy mullioned windows, and from the high chimneys which rose from the roof there sprang a single black column of smoke. "Welcome, Sir Henry. Welcome to Baskerville Hall." A tall man had stepped from the shadow of the porch to open the door of the wagonette. The figure of a woman was silhouetted against the yellow light of the hall. "You don't mind my driving straight home, Sir Henry?" said Dr. Mortimer. "My wife is expecting me." "Surely you will stay and have some dinner." "No, I must go. I would stay to show you over the house, but Barrymore will be a better guide than I. Goodbye, and never hesitate to send for me if I can be of service." The wheels died away down the drive, while Sir Henry and I turned into the hall, and the door clanged heavily behind us. It was a fine apartment in which we found ourselves, large, lofty, and heavily raftered with huge balks of age-blackened oak. In the great old-fashioned fireplace, a log fire crackled and snapped. Sir Henry and I held out our hands to it, for we were numb from our long drive. Then we gazed round us at the high, thin window of old stained glass, the oak panelling, the stags' heads, the coats of arms upon the walls, all dim and sombre in the subdued light of the central lamp. Barrymore returned from taking our luggage to our rooms. He was a remarkable-looking man, tall, handsome, with a square black beard and pale, distinguished features. "Would you wish dinner to be served at once, sir?" "Is it ready?" "In a very few minutes, sir. And now, sir, perhaps I'd best show you to your rooms." A square balustraded gallery ran round the top of the old hall, approached by a double stair. From this central point, 2 long corridors extended the whole length of the building, from which all the bedrooms opened. My own was in the same wing as Baskervilles, and almost next door to it. These rooms appeared to be much more modern than the central part of the house, and the bright paper and numerous candles did something to remove the sombre impression which our arrival had left upon my mind. But the dining room, which opened out of the hall, was a place of shadow and gloom. A dim line of ancestors, in every variety of dress, from the Elizabethan knight to the buck of the Regency, stared down upon us and daunted us by their silent company. We talked little, and I for one was glad when the meal was over, and we were able to retire into the modern billiard room and smoke a cigarette before retiring. I found myself weary and yet wakeful, tossing restlessly from side to side, seeking for the sleep which would not come. Far away a chiming clock struck out the quarters of the hours, but otherwise a deathly silence lay upon the old house. And then suddenly, in the very dead of the night, there came a sound to my ears, clear, resonant, and unmistakable. It was the sob of a woman, the muffled, strangling gasp of one who is torn by an uncontrollable sorrow. The fresh beauty of the following morning did something to efface from our minds the grim and grey impression which had been left upon us both by our first experience at Baskerville Hall. As Sir Henry and I sat at breakfast, the sunlight flooded in through the high mullioned windows, throwing watery patches of colour from the coats of arms which covered them. "I guess it is ourselves and not the house that we have to blame," said the baronet. "We were tired with our journey and chilled by our drive, so we took a grey view of the place. Now we are fresh and well, so all is cheerful once more." "And yet it was not entirely a question of imagination," I answered. "Did you, for example, happen to hear someone, a woman, I think, sobbing in the night?" "That is curious, for I did when I was half asleep fancy I heard something of the sort. I waited quite a time, but there was no more of it, so I concluded that it was all a dream." "I heard it, distinctly," said I. He rang the bell and asked Barrymore whether he could account for our experience. "There are only 2 women in the house, Sir Henry," he answered. "One is the scullery maid who sleeps in the other wing. The other is my wife, and I can answer for it that the sound could not have come from her." And yet he lied as he said it, for it chanced that after breakfast I met Mrs. Barrymore in the long corridor with the sun full upon her face. She was a large, impassive, heavy-featured woman with a stern, set expression of mouth. But her telltale eyes were red and glanced at me from between swollen lids. It was she, then, who wept in the night. And if she did so, her husband must know it. Already round this pale-faced, handsome, black-bearded man there was gathering an atmosphere of mystery and of gloom. Was it possible that it was Barrymore, after all, who we had seen in the cab in Regent Street? How could I settle the point forever? Obviously, the first thing to do was to see the Grimpen postmaster. It was a pleasant walk of 4 miles along the edge of the moor, leading me at last to a small grey hamlet in which 2 larger buildings, which proved to be the inn and the house of Dr. Mortimer, stood high above the rest. The postmaster, who was also the village grocer, had a clear recollection of the telegram. "Certainly, sir. I had the telegram delivered to Mr. Barrymore exactly as directed." "Who delivered it?" "My boy here. James, you delivered that telegram to Mr. Barrymore at the Hall last week, did you not?" "Yes, father, I delivered it." "Into his own hands?" I asked. "Well, he was up in the loft at the time, so that I could not put it into his own hands, but I gave it into Mrs. Barrymore's hands, and she promised to deliver it at once." "Did you see Mr. Barrymore?" I asked. "No, sir, I tell you he was in the loft." It seemed hopeless to pursue the inquiry any further, and I left. But it was clear that in spite of Holmes' ruse, we had no proof that Barrymore had not been in London all the time. Suddenly my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of running feet behind me, and a voice which called my name. I turned, expecting to see Dr. Mortimer, but to my surprise, It was a stranger who was pursuing me. He was a small, slim, clean-shaven, prim-faced man, flaxen-haired and lean-jawed, between 30 and 40 years of age, dressed in a grey suit and wearing a straw hat. A tin box of botanical specimens hung over his shoulder, and he carried a green butterfly net in one of his hands. "You will, I am sure, excuse my presumption, Dr. Watson," said he, as he came panting up to where I stood. "You may possibly have heard my name from our mutual friend, Dr. Mortimer. I'm Stapleton, of Merripit House." "How did you know me?" "I've been calling on Mortimer, and he pointed you out to me from the window of his surgery as you passed. As our road lay the same way, I thought that I would overtake you and introduce myself. I trust that Sir Henry is none the worse for his journey." "He's very well, thank you," said I. "We were all rather afraid that after the sad death of Sir Charles, the new baronet might refuse to live here. Sir Henry has no superstitious fears in the matter?" "I do not think that is likely." "Of course, you know the legend of the fiend dog which haunts the family." "Yes, I have heard it." We had come to a point where a narrow grassy path struck off from the road and wound away across the moor. "A moderate walk along this moor path brings us to Merripit House," said he. "Perhaps you could spare an hour that I might have the pleasure of introducing you to my sister." I accepted Stapleton's invitation, and we turned together down the path. "It's a wonderful place, the moor," said he, looking round over the undulating downs. "So vast, and so mysterious." "You know it well, then?" "Well, I've only been here 2 years, but my taste led me to explore, and I should think that there are very few men who know it better than I do." "Is it so hard to know?" "Very hard. You see, for example, this great plain to the north here, with the queer hills breaking out of it?" "It would be a rare place for a gallop." "You would naturally think so, and the thought has cost folk their lives before now. You notice those bright green spots scattered thickly over it?" "Yes, they seem more fertile than the rest." Stapleton laughed. "That is the great Grimpen Mire. A false step yonder means death to man or beast. Only yesterday I saw one of the moor ponies wander into it. He never came out. I saw his head for quite a long time craning out of the bog hole, but it sucked him down at last. And yet I can find my way to the very heart of it and return alive." "But why should you wish to go into such a horrible place?" "Well, you see the hills beyond? They are really islands cut off on all sides by the impassable mire. That is where the rare plants and the butterflies are." Just then, a long, low moan, indescribably sad, swept over the moor. It filled the whole air, and yet it was impossible to say whence it came. From a dull murmur it swelled into a deep roar, and then sank back again into a melancholy, throbbing murmur once again. "What is that?" I asked. "The peasants say it is the hound of the Baskervilles calling for its prey. I've heard it once or twice before, but never quite so loud." I looked round, with a chill of fear in my heart. "Look at the hillside yonder," said Stapleton. "What do you make of those?" The whole steep slope was covered with grey circular rings of stone, a score of them at least. "What are they? Sheep pens?" "No, they are the homes of our worthy ancestors. Prehistoric man lived thickly on the moor, and we find all his little arrangements exactly as he left them. These are his wigwams with the roofs off. Oh, excuse me an instant. It is surely Cyclopides." A small moth had fluttered across our path, and in an instant Stapleton was rushing with extraordinary energy and speed in pursuit of it. I was standing watching, when I heard the sound of steps and, turning round, found a woman near me upon the path. She had come from the direction of Merripit House. I could not doubt that this was the Miss Stapleton of whom I had been told. However, there could not have been a greater contrast between brother and sister, for Stapleton was neutral-tinted, with light hair and grey eyes, while she was darker than any brunette whom I had ever seen in England, slim, elegant, and tall. I'd raised my hat, and was about to make some explanatory remark when her own words turned all my thoughts into a new channel. "Go back," she said. "Go straight back to London instantly." Her eyes blazed at me. "Why should I go back?" I asked, surprised. "I cannot explain." She spoke in a low, eager voice. "But for God's sake, do what I ask you. Go back, and never set foot upon the moor again." Stapleton had abandoned the moth chase, and came back to us breathing hard and flushed with his exertions. "Hello, Beryl," said he. "You've introduced yourselves, I can see." "Yes, I was telling Sir Henry that it was rather late for him to see the true beauties of the moor." "Why, who do you imagine this is?" "I imagine that it must be Sir Henry Baskerville," she said. "No, no," said I. "Only a humble commoner, but I am Sir Henry's friend. My name is Dr. Watson." A flush passed over her face. "We have been talking at cross purposes," said she. A short walk brought us to Merripit House, a bleak moorland house, once the farm of some grazier in the old days. An orchard surrounded it, but the trees, as is usual upon the moor, were stunted and nipped. We were admitted by a strange, wizened old manservant, who seemed in keeping with the house. Inside, however, there were large rooms furnished with an elegance in which I seemed to recognize the taste of the lady. As I looked from their windows at the interminable granite-flecked moor, I could not but marvel at what could have brought this highly educated man and this beautiful woman to live in such a place. "Queer spot to choose, is it not?" said he, as if in answer to my thought. "And yet we manage to make ourselves fairly happy, do we not, Beryl?" "Quite happy," said she. "I had a school," said Stapleton, "in the North Country. However, the fates were against us. A serious epidemic broke out, and 3 of the boys died. The school never recovered from the blow, and much of my capital was irretrievably swallowed up. But still, with my strong taste for botany and zoology, I find an unlimited field of work here, and my sister is as devoted to nature as I am." After some conversation of a general nature, I resisted all pressure to stay for lunch, and set off at once upon my return journey, taking the grass-grown path by which we had come. It seems, however, that there must have been some short-cut for those who knew it, for before I reached the road, I was astounded to see Miss Stapleton sitting upon a rock by the side of the track. "I've run all the way in order to cut you off, Dr. Watson. I must not stop, or my brother may miss me. I wanted to say how sorry I am about the stupid mistake I made in thinking that you were Sir Henry. Please forget the words I said, which have no application whatever to you." Please be frank with me, Miss Stapleton. For ever since I've been here, I've been conscious of shadows all around me. Tell me, what is it that you meant, and I will promise to convey your warning to Sir Henry." An expression of irresolution passed for an instant over her face, but her eyes had hardened again when she answered me. "My brother and I were very much shocked by the death of Sir Charles. He was deeply impressed with the curse which hung over his family, and when this tragedy came, I naturally felt that there must be some grounds for the fears he expressed. I was distressed, therefore, when another member of the family came down to live here, and I felt that he should be warned of the danger which he will run. That was all I intended to convey." "I would ask you one more question, Miss Stapleton. If you meant no more than this when you first spoke to me, why should you not wish your brother to overhear what you said?" "My brother is very anxious to have the hall inhabited, for he thinks that it's good for the poor folk upon the moor. He would be very angry if he knew that I had said anything which might induce Sir Henry to go away." Baskerville Hall, October the 13th. My dear Holmes, if you have not had any report within the last few days, it is because there was nothing of importance to relate. Then a very surprising circumstance occurred, which I shall tell you in due course. But first of all, I must keep you in touch with some of the other factors in the situation. Mr. Stapleton came over to call upon Sir Henry, and the very next morning he took us both to show us the spot where the legend of the wicked Hugo is supposed to have had its origin, a place which is so dismal that it might have suggested the story. On our way back, we stayed for lunch at Merripit House, and there Sir Henry made the acquaintance of Miss Stapleton. From the first moment that he saw her, he appeared to be strongly attracted by her, and I am much mistaken if the feeling was not mutual. They dine here tonight, and there is some talk of our going to dine with them next week. The other day, Thursday to be more exact, Dr. Mortimer lunched with us. The Stapletons came in afterwards, and the doctor took us all to the yew alley at Sir Henry's request to show us exactly how everything occurred upon that fatal night. One other neighbour I have met since I wrote last. This is Mr. Frankland of Lafter Hall, who lives some 4 miles to the south of us. He is an elderly man, white-haired and choleric. His passion is for the British law, and he has spent a large fortune in litigation. He fights for the mere pleasure of fighting, and is equally ready to take up either side of a question. He is curiously employed at present, for, being an amateur astronomer, he has an excellent telescope, with which he lies upon the roof of his own house and sweeps the moor all day in the hope of catching a glimpse of the escaped convict. He helps to keep our lives from being monotonous, and gives a little comic relief when it is badly needed. And now, let me tell you more about the Barrymores. First of all, about the test telegram which you sent from London. I told Sir Henry how the matter stood, and he at once had Barrymore up and asked him whether he had received the telegram himself. Barrymore said that he had. "Did the boy deliver it into your own hands?" asked Sir Henry. "No," said he. "I was in the box-room at the time, and my wife brought it up to me." "Did you answer it yourself?" "No, I told my wife what to answer, and she went down to write it." In the evening, Barrymore returned to the subject of his own accord. "I could not quite understand the object of your questions this morning, Sir Henry. I trust they do not mean that I have done anything to forfeit your confidence." Sir Henry had to assure him that it was not so, and pacify him by giving him a considerable part of his old wardrobe, the London outfit, having now all arrived. "You are aware, Holmes, that I am not a very sound sleeper, and since I have been on guard in this house, my slumbers have been lighter than ever. Last night, about 2 in the morning, I was aroused by a stealthy step passing my room. I rose, opened my door, and peeped out. A man walked softly down the passage with a candle in his hand. I could merely see the outline, but his height told me that it was Barrymore. I've told you that the corridor is broken by the balcony which runs round the hall, but that it is resumed upon the farther side. I followed him. When I came round the balcony, he had reached the end of the farther corridor, and had entered one of the rooms. Now, all these rooms are unfurnished and unoccupied. So I crept down the passage as noiselessly as I could, and peeped round the corner of the door. Barrymore was crouching at the window, with the candle held against the glass. He stared out into the blackness of the moor. For some minutes he stood watching intently. Then he gave a deep groan, and with an impatient gesture he put out the light. Instantly I made my way back to my room, and very shortly came the stealthy steps passing once more again upon their return journey. Baskerville Hall, October the 15th. My dear Holmes, before breakfast on the morning following my adventure, I went down the corridor and examined the room in which Barrymore had been on the night before. The western window through which he had stared so intently has, I noticed, one peculiarity above all the other windows in the house. It commands the nearest outlook onto the moor. It follows, therefore, that Barrymore must have been looking out for something or somebody upon the moor. I had an interview with Sir Henry in his study after breakfast, and I told him all that I had seen. He was less surprised than I expected. "I knew that Barrymore walked about nights," said he, "and I had a mind to speak to him about it. 2 or 3 times I've heard his footsteps in the passage coming and going just about the hour you name." "Perhaps, then, he pays a visit every night to that particular window," I suggested. "Perhaps he does. If so, we should be able to shadow him and see what it is that he is after." So that night I sat up with Sir Henry in his room until nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. But no sound of any sort did we hear except the chiming of the clock upon the stairs. The next night we had almost given up in despair when we heard the creak of a step in the passage. We heard it pass along until it died away in the distance. Then Sir Henry gently opened his door, and we set out in pursuit. Softly we stole along until we come into the other wing. We were just in time to catch a glimpse of the tall, black-bearded figure passing through the same door as before. When at last we reached the door and peeped through, we found him crouching at the window, candle in hand, his face pressed against the pane, exactly as I'd seen him 2 nights before. Sir Henry walked into the room, and as he did, Barrymore sprang up and stood, livid and trembling, before us. "What are you doing here, Barrymore?" he asked. "Nothing, sir." The shadows sprang up and down from the shaking of his candle. "It was the windows, sir. I go round at night to see that they're fastened." "Look here, Barrymore," said Sir Henry sternly. "We have made up our minds to have the truth out of you, so it will save you trouble to tell it sooner rather than later. Come now, no lies. What were you doing at the window?" "Don't ask me, Sir Henry, don't ask me. I give you my word, sir, that it is not my secret, and that I cannot tell it." A sudden idea occurred to me, and I took the candle from the window-sill where the butler had placed it. "He may have been holding it as a signal," said I. "Let us see if there is an answer." I held it as he had done, and stared out into the darkness of the night. And then a tiny pinpoint of yellow light suddenly transfixed the dark veil, and glowed steadily. "There it is!" I cried. "No, sir, it is nothing, nothing at all," the butler broke in. "I assure you, sir." "Who is your confederate out yonder?" cried Sir Henry. "And what is this conspiracy that is going on?" The man's face became openly defiant. "It is my business, and not yours. I will not tell." "Then you leave my employment right away, and you go in disgrace. Your family has lived with mine for over 100 years under this roof, and here I find you deep in some dark plot against me?" No, sir. No, not against you." It was a woman's voice. Mrs. Barrymore was standing at the door. "It is my doing, Sir Henry, all mine. He has done nothing except for my sake, and because I asked him." "Speak out, then. What does this mean?" asked Sir Henry. "My unhappy brother is starving on the moor. We cannot let him perish at our very gates. The light is a signal to him that food is ready for him, and his light out yonder is to show us the spot to which to bring it." "Then your brother is—" "Yes, the escaped convict, sir. Selden, the criminal." "Is this true, Barrymore?" "Yes, Sir Henry, every word of it." "Well, I cannot blame you for standing by your own wife. Forget what I said. Go to your room, you two, and we shall talk further about this matter in the morning." When they were gone, we looked out of the window again. "How far do you think it is?" I asked. "It cannot be far if Barrymore is to carry out the food to it. And he's waiting, this villain, beside that light." "By thunder, Watson, I'm going out to take that man." "I will come with you," said I. "Then get your revolver and put on your boots." In 5 minutes, Sir Henry and I were ready and starting upon our expedition. Now and again the moon peeped out for an instant, but clouds were driving over the face of the sky, and just as we came out on the moor, a thin rain began to fall. The light still burned steadily in front. "I say, Watson," said Sir Henry, "what would Holmes say to this? How about that hour of darkness in which the power of evil is exalted?" As if in answer to his words, there rose suddenly out of the vast gloom of the moor that strange cry which I had already heard upon the borders of the great Grimpen mire. A long, deep mutter, then a rising howl. and then the sad moan in which it died away. The baronet caught my sleeve, and his face glimmered white through the darkness. "My God, what was that, Watson?" "I don't know. It's a sound they have on the moor. I heard it once before." We stood straining our ears, but nothing came. "Watson," said Sir Henry. "It was the cry of the hound." My blood ran cold in my veins, for there was a break in his voice which told the sudden horror which had seized him. "What do they call this sound?" he asked. "Who?" "The folk on the countryside." "Oh, they are ignorant people. Why should you mind what they call it?" "Tell me, Watson, what do they say of it?" I hesitated, but could not escape the question. "They say it is the cry of the Hound of the Baskervilles." He groaned, and was silent for a few moments. "Is it possible that I am really in danger from so dark a cause? You don't believe it, do you, Watson?" "No, no." "And yet it was one thing to laugh about it in London, and it is another to stand out here in the darkness of the moor and hear such a cry as that." "I don't think I'll get that cry out of my head. What do you advise that we should do now?" "Shall we turn back?" "No, by thunder. We've come out here to get our man, and that's what we will do." We stumbled slowly along in the darkness. Sometimes the light seemed to be far away upon the horizon, and sometimes it might have been within a few yards of us. But at last we could see whence it came. A guttering candle was stuck in a crevice of the rocks which flanked it on each side so as to keep the wind from it, and also to prevent it from being visible, save in the direction of Baskerville Hall. A boulder of granite concealed our approach. "What shall we do now?" whispered Sir Henry. "Let us see if we can get a glimpse of him." The words were hardly out of my mouth when we both saw him. Over the rocks, in the crevice of which the candle burned, there was thrust out an evil yellow face, a terrible animal face, all seamed and scored with vile passions, foul with mire, with a bristling beard, and hung with matted hair. I sprang forward, and Sir Henry did the same. At the same moment, the convict screamed out a curse at us and hurled a rock. I caught one glimpse of his short, squat, strongly built figure as he sprang to his feet and turned to run. The moon broke through the clouds. We rushed over the brow of the hill, and there was our man running with great speed down the other side, springing over the stones in his way with the agility of a mountain goat. We ran and ran until we were completely blown, but the space between us grew even wider. Finally, we stopped and sat panting on two rocks, while we watched him disappearing in the distance. And it was at this moment that there occurred a most strange and unexpected thing. We had risen from our rocks, and were turning to go home. The moon was low upon the right, and the jagged pinnacle of a granite tor stood up against the lower curve of its silver disk. There, outlined as black as an ebony statue on that shining background, I saw the figure of a man upon the tor. Do not think that it was a delusion, Holmes. I assure you that I have never in my life seen anything more clearly. It was not the convict. This man was far from the place where the latter had disappeared. Besides, he was a much taller man. With a cry of surprise, I pointed him out to Sir Henry, but in the instant during which I had turned to grasp his arm, the man was gone. So far, I've been able to quote from the reports which I forwarded during these early days to Sherlock Holmes. Now, I refer to the diary which I kept at the time. A few extracts will carry me on to those scenes which are indelibly fixed in every detail upon my memory. I proceed, then, from the morning which followed our abortive chase of the convict. October 16th. A dull and foggy day with a drizzle of rain. After breakfast, Barrymore asked leave to speak with Sir Henry, and they were closeted in his study. After a time, Sir Henry called for me. Barrymore thinks it was unfair on our part to hunt his brother-in-law down when he, of his own free will, had told us the secret." The butler was standing, very pale, but very collected, before us. "I didn't think you would have taken advantage of it, Sir Henry. Indeed, I didn't. Well, the man is a public danger, Barrymore. There are lonely houses scattered over the moor, and he is a fellow who would stick at nothing. He'll break into no house, sir. I'll give you my solemn word upon that. In a very few days the necessary arrangements will have been made, and he will be on his way to South America. For God's sake, sir, I beg of you not to let the police know that he is still on the moor." "What do you say, Watson?" I shrugged my shoulders. If he were safely out of the country, it would relieve the taxpayer of a burden. "That is true," said Sir Henry. "Well, Barrymore, God bless you, sir, and thank you from my heart. It would have killed my poor wife if he'd been taken again. I guess we are aiding and abetting a felony, Watson, but after what we've heard, I don't feel as if I could give the man up. So there is an end of it. All right, Barrymore, you can go." The man turned, hesitated, and then came back. "You've been so kind to us, sir, that I should like to do the best I can for you in return. I know something about poor Sir Charles's death." The baronet and I were both upon our feet. "Do you know how he died?" asked Sir Henry. "No, sir, I don't know that." "What then?" "I know why he was at the gate at that hour. It was to meet a woman." "To meet a woman? He?" "Yes, sir." "And the woman's name?" "I can't give you the name, sir, but her initials were L.L." "How do you know this, Barrymore?" "Your uncle had a letter that morning, sir. It was from Coombe Tracy, and it was addressed in a woman's hand." "Well?" "Well, sir, I thought no more of the matter, and never would have done had it not been for my wife. Only a few weeks ago she was cleaning out Sir Charles's study. It had never been touched since his death, and she found the ashes of a burned letter in the back of the grate. The greater part of it was charred to pieces, but one little slip, the end of the page, hung together, and the writing could still be read, though it was grey on a black ground. It seemed to us to be a postscript, and it said, 'Please, please, as you are a gentleman, burn this letter and be at the gate by 10 o'clock. Beneath it were the initials, L.L. "Have you got that slip?" "No, sir. It crumbled all to bits after we moved it." I went at once to my room and drew up my report of the conversation for Holmes. It is evident that he has been very busy of late, for the notes which I have had from Baker Street are few and short. How I wish that he were here. October 17th. All today the rain poured down. In the evening I put on my waterproof and walked far upon the sodden moor, full of dark imaginings. As I walked back, I was overtaken by Dr. Mortimer, driving in his dog-cart over a rough moorland track which led from the outlying farmhouse of Foulmire. He gave me a lift home. "By the way, Mortimer," said I, as we jolted along, "I suppose there are few people living within driving distance of this whom you do not know." "Well, hardly any, I think," he replied. "Can you then tell me the name of a woman whose initials are L.L.? He thought for a few minutes. "There is a Laura Lyons. Her initials are L.L., but she lives in Coombe Tracy." "Who is she?" "Franklin's daughter." "Old Franklin, the crank?" "Exactly. She married an artist named Lyons, who deserted her. The fault, from what I hear, may not have been entirely on one side. Her father refused to have anything to do with her." "How does she live?" I asked. "Her story got about, and several of the people here did something to enable her to earn an honest living. Stapleton did for one, and Sir Charles for another. I gave a trifle myself. It was to set her up in a typewriting business." Mortimer stayed to dinner, and he and Sir Henry played écarté afterwards. The butler brought my coffee into the library, and I took the chance to ask him a few questions. "Well, Barrymore," said I, "has this precious relation of yours departed, or is he still lurking out yonder?" "I don't know, sir. I've not heard of him since I left food out for him last, and that was 3 days ago." "Did you see him then?" "No, sir, but the food was gone when I next went that way." "Then he was certainly there." "So you would think, sir, unless it was the other man who took it." I sat with my coffee cup halfway to my lips and stared at Barrymore. "You know there is another man, then?" "Yes, sir." "How do you know?" "Selden told me of him, sir, a week or more ago. The other man's in hiding too, but he's not a convict, so far as I can make out." "Did Selden say where this chap lived?" "Among the old houses on the hillside, the stone huts where the old folk used to live." "But how about his food?" "Well, Selden found out that he's got a lad who works for him and brings him all he needs." The next afternoon, I was driven to Coombe Tracy. I told Perkins the coachman to put up the horses, and I made inquiries for the lady whom I'd come to interrogate. I had no difficulty in finding her rooms, which were central and well appointed. The first impression left by Mrs. Lyons was one of extreme beauty. Her eyes and hair were of the same rich hazel colour, and her cheeks, though considerably freckled, were flushed with the exquisite bloom of the brunette, the dainty pink which lurks at the heart of the sulphur rose. "It is about the late Sir Charles Baskerville that I've come to see you," said I. "What can I tell you about him?" she asked, and her fingers played nervously over the stops of her typewriter. "You knew him, did you not?" "I owe a great deal to his kindness." "Did you correspond with him?" "I certainly wrote to him once or twice to acknowledge his delicacy and his generosity." "Did you ever write to Sir Charles asking him to meet you?" I continued. Mrs. Lyons flushed. "Really, sir, this is a very extraordinary question." "I'm sorry, madam, but I must repeat it." "Then I answer, certainly not." "Not on the very day of Sir Charles's death?" Her dry lips could not speak the no which I saw rather than heard. "Surely your memory deceives you," said I. "I could even quote a passage of your letter. It ran, 'Please, please, as you are a gentleman, burn this letter, and be at the gate by 10 o'clock. I thought that she had fainted, but she recovered herself by a supreme effort. "Is there no such thing as a gentleman?" she gasped. "You do Sir Charles an injustice. He did burn the letter, but sometimes a letter may be legible even when burned. You acknowledge now that you wrote it." "Yes, I did write it," she cried. "Why should I deny it? I have no reason to be ashamed of it. I wished him to help me. I believed that if I'd had an interview, I would gain his help, so I asked him to meet me." "But why at such an hour?" "Because I'd only just learned that he was going to London next day, and might be away for months." "Well, what happened when you got there?" "I never went." "Mrs. Lyons, I never went. Something intervened to prevent my going." "What was that?" "That is a private matter. I cannot tell it." "You acknowledge, then, that you made an appointment with Sir Charles at the very hour and place at which he met his death, but you deny that you kept the appointment." "That is the truth." "What sort of help were you seeking?" "The matter is a very private one." "The more reason why you should avoid a public investigation," said I. "I will tell you, then. If you have heard anything of my unhappy history, you will know that I made a rash marriage and had reason to regret it. I have heard so much. At the time that I wrote this letter to Sir Charles, I had just learned that there was a prospect of my regaining my freedom if certain expenses could be met. It meant everything to me. Peace of mind, happiness, self-respect, everything. I knew Sir Charles's generosity, and I thought that if he heard the story from my own lips, he would help me." "Then how is it that you did not go?" Because I received help in the interval from another source. Why then did you not write to Sir Charles and explain this? So I should have done, had I not seen his death in the paper next morning. The woman's story hung coherently together, and all my questions were unable to shake it. Mr. Frankland was standing grey-whiskered and red-faced outside the gate of his garden, which opened on the high road along which I had travelled on my way home. "Good day, Dr. Watson," cried he, with unwonted good humour. "You must really give your horses a rest and come in and have a glass of wine to congratulate me." In the hope that I might learn more about his daughter, I alighted and sent a message to Sir Henry that I should walk over in time for dinner. Then I followed Frankland into his dining-room. "It is a great day for me, sir, one of the red-letter days of my life," he cried with many chuckles. "I have brought off a double event. I've established a right-of-way through the centre of Old Middleton's Park, slap across it, sir, within 100 yards of his own front door. What do you think of that? And I've closed the wood where the Fenworthy folk used to picnic. I have no doubt that the Fenworthy people will burn me in effigy tonight. I told the police, last time they did it, that they should stop these disgraceful exhibitions. The county constabulary is in a scandalous state, sir, and it has not afforded me the protection to which I'm entitled. I told them that they would have occasion to regret their treatment of me, and already my words have come true." "How so?" I asked. "Because I could tell them what they're dying to know, but nothing would induce me to help the rascals in any way." "Some poaching case, no doubt," said I, with an indifferent manner. "Ha, ha, my boy, a very much more important matter than that. What about the convict on the moor?" I started. "You don't mean you know where he is?" "I may not know exactly where he is, but I have seen with my own eyes the messenger who takes him his food." My heart sank for Barrymore, but his next remark took a weight off my mind. "His food is taken to him by a child. I see him every day through my telescope upon the roof." A child? Barrymore had said that our unknown was supplied by a boy. It was on his track, and not upon the convicts, that Franklin had stumbled. If I could get his knowledge, it might save me a long and weary hunt. But incredulity and indifference were evidently my strongest cards. I should say that it was more likely that it was the son of one of the moorland shepherds taking out his father's dinner. Franklin's grey whiskers bristled like those of an angry cat. "Indeed, sir," said he, pointing out over the wide-stretching moor. "Do you see that black tor over yonder? Well, do you see the low hill beyond with the thorn bush upon it? It is the stoniest part of the whole moor. Is that a place where a shepherd would be likely to take his station? Your suggestion, sir, is— But wait a moment, Dr. Watson. Do my eyes deceive me, or is there at present something moving upon that hillside?" It was several miles off, but I could distinctly see a small dark dot against the dull green and grey. "Come, sir, come!" cried Frankland, rushing upstairs. "You will see with your own eyes." The telescope, mounted upon a tripod, stood upon the flat leads of the house. Frankland clapped his eye to it and gave a cry of satisfaction. "Quick, Dr. Watson, quick, before he passes over the hill!" There he was, sure enough, a small urchin with a little bundle upon his shoulder, toiling slowly up the hill. When he reached the crest, he looked round him with a furtive and stealthy air. Then he vanished over the hill. "Well, am I right?" "Certainly there is a boy who seems to have some secret errand." "And what the errand is, even a county constable could guess. But not one word shall they have from me, and I bind you to secrecy also, Dr. Watson. Not a word, you understand?" "Just as you wish," I said. I succeeded in dissuading him from his announced intention of walking home with me. I kept the road as long as his eye was on me, and then I struck off across the moor and made for the stony hill over which the boy had disappeared. The sun was already sinking when I reached the summit of the hill. The boy was nowhere to be seen. But down beneath me, in a cleft of the hills, there was a circle of the old stone huts, and in the middle of them there was one which retained sufficient roof to act as a screen against the weather. A pathway among the boulders led to the dilapidated opening which served as a door. All was silent within. The unknown might be lurking there. Throwing aside my cigarette, I closed my hand upon the butt of my revolver, and walking swiftly up to the door, I looked in. The place was empty. But this was certainly where the man lived. Some blankets, rolled in a waterproof, lay upon the very stone slab upon which Neolithic man had once slumbered. The ashes of a fire were heaped in a rude grate. Beside it lay some cooking utensils and a bucket half full of water. In the middle of the hut, a flat stone served the purpose of a table, and upon this stood a small cloth bundle. It contained a loaf of bread, a tin tongue, and 2 tins of preserved peaches. Beneath it lay a sheet of paper. I raised it, and this is what I read, roughly scrawled in pencil. Dr. Watson has gone to Coombe Tracy. It was I, then, and not Sir Henry, who was being dogged by this secret man. He had set an agent, the boy perhaps, upon my track, and this was his report. Outside, the sun was sinking low and the west was blazing with scarlet and gold. With tingling nerves, but a fixed purpose, I sat in the dark recesses of the hut and waited with sombre patience for the coming of its tenant. And then at last I heard him. Far away came the sharp clink of a boot striking upon a stone. Then another and yet another, coming nearer and nearer. I shrank back into the darkest corner and cocked the pistol in my pocket. There was a long pause. Then once more the footsteps approached, and a shadow fell across the opening of the hut. "It is a lovely evening, my dear Watson," said a well-known voice. "Holmes!" I cried. "Holmes!" "Come out," said he, "and please be careful with the revolver." I stooped under the rude lintel, and there he sat upon a stone outside, his grey eyes dancing with amusement as they fell upon my astonished features. In his tweed suit and cloth cap, he looked like any other tourist upon the moor. "I never was more glad to see anyone in my life," said I as I wrung him by the hand. "Or more astonished, eh?" "Well, I must confess it. The surprise was not all on one side, I assure you. I had no idea you'd found my occasional retreat until I was within 20 paces of the door. My footprint, I suppose. No, Watson. When I see the stub of a cigarette marked Bradley of Oxford Street, I know that my friend Watson is in the neighbourhood. You will see it there beside the path. I was convinced you were sitting in ambush, a weapon within reach, waiting for the tenant to return. So you actually thought that I was the criminal?" "I didn't know who you were, but I was determined to find out." "Excellent, Watson. And how did you localize me?" "Your boy had been observed, and that gave me a guide where to look." "Who is he, by the way?" said I. "I brought Cartwright down with me. You remember the little chap at the express office? And he's seen after my simple wants, a loaf of bread and a clean collar, and he has given me an extra pair of eyes upon a very active pair of feet, and both have been invaluable." "Then my reports have all been wasted." My voice trembled as I recalled the pains and the pride with which I composed them. Holmes took a bundle of papers from his pocket. "Here are your reports, my dear fellow, and very well thumbed, I assure you. I must compliment you exceedingly upon the zeal and the intelligence which you have shown over an extraordinarily difficult case." The sun had set and dusk was settling over the moor. The air had turned chill, and we withdrew into the hut for warmth. There, sitting together in the twilight, I told Holmes of my conversation with Mrs. Lyons. "This is most important," said he, when I concluded. "It fills up a gap which I have been unable to bridge. You are aware, perhaps, that a close intimacy exists between this lady and the man Stapleton." "I did not know of a close intimacy," said I. "They meet, they write, there is a complete understanding between them. Now, this puts a very powerful weapon into our hands. If I could use it to detach his wife... His wife? Holmes smiled. Yes, the lady who has passed here as Miss Stapleton is in reality his wife. Good heavens, Holmes! Are you sure of what you say? I repeat that the lady is his wife and not his sister. But why this elaborate deception? Because he foresaw that she would be very much more useful to him in the character of a free woman. All my unspoken instincts, my vague suspicions, suddenly took shape and centered upon the naturalist. In that impassive, colourless man with his straw hat and his butterfly net, I seemed to see something terrible, a creature of infinite patience and craft, with a smiling face and a murderous heart. It is he, then, who is our enemy. It is he who dogged us in London. So I read the riddle, said Holmes. And the warning. It must have come from her. Exactly. But are you sure of this, Holmes? How do you know that the woman is his wife? He so far forgot himself as to tell you a true piece of autobiography upon the occasion when he first met you. He was once a schoolmaster in the north of England. A little investigation showed me that a school had come to grief under atrocious circumstances, and that the man who had owned it, the name was different, had disappeared with his wife. The description agreed. When I learned that the missing man was devoted to entomology, the identification was complete. If this woman is in truth his wife, where does Mrs. Lyons come in? I asked. That is one of the points upon which your own researches have shed a light. I did not know about the projected divorce between Mrs. Lyons and her husband. In regarding Stapleton as an unmarried man, she counted, no doubt, on becoming his wife. One last question, Holmes, I said. What is the meaning of it all? What is Stapleton after? Holmes' voice sank as he answered. Murder, Watson. Refined, cold-blooded, deliberate murder. A terrible scream, a prolonged yell of horror and anguish burst out over the silence of the moor. Holmes sprang to his feet, and I saw his dark, athletic outline at the door of the hut, his face peering into the darkness. Again the agonized cry swept through the silent night, louder and nearer than ever. A new sound mingled with it, a deep, muttered rumble, musical and yet menacing, rising and falling like the low, constant murmur of the sea. "The Hound!" cried Holmes. "Come, Watson, come! Great heavens, if we are too late!" He had started running swiftly over the moor, and I followed at his heels. But now from somewhere among the broken ground immediately in front of us, there came one last despairing yell, and then a dull, heavy thud. Not another sound broke the heavy silence of the windless night. Blindly we ran through the gloom. At every rise Holmes looked eagerly around him, but the shadows were thick upon the moor. "Can you see anything, Watson?" "Nothing. But hark! What is that?" A low moan had fallen upon our ears. There it was again upon our left. On that side, a ridge of rocks ended in a sheer cliff which overlooked a stone-strewn slope. On its jagged face was spread-eagled some dark, irregular object. As we ran towards it, the vague outline hardened into a definite shape. It was a prostrate man, face downwards upon the ground, the head doubled under him at a horrible angle. So grotesque was the attitude that I could not for the instant realize that the moan had been the passing of his soul. Holmes laid his hand upon him and held it up again, with an exclamation of horror. The gleam of the match which he had struck shone upon his clotted fingers and upon the ghastly pool which widened slowly from the crushed skull of the victim. And it shone upon something else which turned our hearts sick and faint within us. The body of Sir Henry Baskerville. There was no chance of either of us forgetting that peculiar ruddy tweed suit, the very one which he had worn on the first morning that we'd seen him in Baker Street. Then the match flickered and went out, even as the hope had gone out of our souls. We stood with bitter hearts on either side of the mangled body, overwhelmed by this sudden and irrevocable disaster which had brought all our long and weary labours to so piteous an end. Then, as the moon rose, the agony of those contorted limbs struck me with a spasm of pain and blurred my eyes with tears. "We must send for help, Holmes," said I. "We cannot carry him all the way to the hall." "Good heavens, are you mad?" Holmes had uttered a cry and bent over the body. Now he was dancing and laughing and wringing my hand. "A beard! A beard! The man has a beard!" "A beard?" said I. "It is not the baronet. It is... Why, it is my neighbour, the convict!" With feverish haste we had turned the body over, and that dripping beard was pointing up to the cold, clear moon. There could be no doubt about the beetling forehead, the sunken animal eyes. It was indeed the same face which had glared upon me in the light of the candle from over the rock, the face of Selden, the criminal. Then, in an instant, all was clear to me. I remembered how Sir Henry had told me that he had handed his old wardrobe to Barrymore. Barrymore had passed it on in order to help Selden in his escape. Boots, shirt, cap, it was all Sir Henry's. I told Holmes how the matter stood. "Then the clothes have been the poor fellow's death," said he. "It is clear enough that the Hound has been put onto a scent from some article of Sir Henry's. The boot which was stolen in the hotel, in all probability, and so it ran this poor man down, wearing Sir Henry's clothes. There is... Hello, Watson. What's this? It's the man himself, by all that's wonderful and audacious. Not a word to show your suspicions, not a word, or my plans crumble to the ground." A figure was approaching us over the moor, and I saw the dull red glow of a cigar. The moon shone upon him, and I could distinguish the dapper shape and jaunty walk of Mr. Stapleton. "Why, Dr. Watson, that's not you, is it? You're the last man I should have expected to see on the moor at this time of night. But dear me, what's this? Somebody hurt? No, don't tell me that it is our friend Sir Henry." He stooped over the dead man. I heard a sharp intake of his breath, and the cigar fell from his fingers. Who's this?" he stammered. "It is Selden, the man who escaped from Princeton." "Dear me, what a very shocking affair. How did he die?" "He appears to have broken his neck by falling over these rocks. My friend and I were strolling on the moor, and we heard a cry." "I heard a cry also," said Stapleton. "That was what brought me out. I was uneasy about Sir Henry." "Why about Sir Henry in particular?" I could not help asking. "Because I had suggested that he should come over. When he did not come, I was surprised, and I naturally became alarmed for his safety when I heard cries upon the moor. By the way," his eyes darted from my face to Holmes, "did you hear anything else besides a cry?" "No," said Holmes. "Did you?" "No." "What do you mean, then?" "Oh, you know the stories that the peasants tell about a phantom hound and so on. It's said to be heard at night upon the moor." "We heard nothing of the kind," said I. "And what is your theory of this poor fellow's death?" said Stapleton. "I have no doubt that anxiety and exposure have driven him off his head, and he has rushed about the moor in a crazy state and eventually fallen over here and broken his neck." "That seems the most reasonable theory," said Stapleton. "What do you think about it, Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" My friend bowed his compliments. "You are quick at identification," said Holmes. "We've been expecting you in these parts since Dr. Watson came down. I have no doubt that Dr. Watson's explanation will cover the facts. I will take an unpleasant remembrance back to London with me tomorrow." "Oh, you return tomorrow?" asked Stapleton. "That is my intention." "I hope your visit has cast some light upon these occurrences which have puzzled all of us." Holmes shrugged his shoulders. "One cannot always have the success for which one hopes. It has not been a satisfactory case." Sir Henry was more pleased than surprised to see Sherlock Holmes. Over a belated supper, we explained as much of our experience as seemed desirable that he should know. But first I had the unpleasant duty of breaking the news of Selden's death to Barrymore and his wife. To him it may have been an unmitigated relief, but she wept bitterly in her apron. Evil indeed is the man who has not one woman to mourn him. "I've been moping in the house all day since Watson went off this morning," said Sir Henry at dinner. "If I hadn't sworn not to go about alone, I might have had a more lively evening, for I had a message from Stapleton asking me over there." "I have no doubt that you would have had a more lively evening," said Holmes dryly. "But how about the case?" asked Sir Henry. "Have you made anything out of the tangle?" "I think I shall be in a position to make the situation rather more clear to you before long, if you will give me your help." "Whatever you tell me to do, I will do," said Sir Henry. "Very good. And I will ask you also to do it blindly, without asking the reason." "Just as you like." "If you will do this, I have no doubt—" He stopped suddenly, and stared fixedly over my shoulder into the air. "What is it?" we both cried. He waved his hand towards the line of portraits which covered the opposite wall. "Watson won't allow that I know anything about art, but that is mere jealousy, because our views upon the subject differ. Now, these are really a very fine series of portraits." "Well, I'm glad to hear you say so," said Sir Henry. "They are all family portraits, I presume?" "Every one." "Do you know their names?" asked Holmes. "Barrymore has been coaching me in them, and I think I can say my lessons fairly well." "Who is the cavalier opposite me, the one with the black velvet and the lace?" "That is the cause of all the mischief, the wicked Hugo, who started the Hound of the Baskervilles." "Dear me," said Holmes. "He seems a quiet, meek-mannered man enough, but I dare say there was a lurking devil in his eyes." When Sir Henry had gone to his room, Holmes led me back into the banqueting hall, his bedroom candle in his hand, and he held it up against the time-stained portrait of Hugo Baskerville. "Is it like anyone you know?" he asked. "Well, there is something of Sir Henry about the jaw." "Just a suggestion, perhaps. But wait an instant." He stood upon a chair, and holding up the light in his left hand, he curved his right arm over the broad hat and round the long ringlets. "Good heavens!" I cried in amazement. The face of Stapleton had sprung out of the canvas. "Ha! You see it now. My eyes have been trained to examine faces, and not their trimmings." "But this is marvellous," said I. "It might be his portrait." "Yes," said Holmes. "It is an interesting instance of a throwback, which appears to be both physical and spiritual. The fellow is a Baskerville, that is evident." "With designs upon the succession," said I. "Exactly," replied Holmes. I was up betimes in the morning, but Holmes was afoot earlier still, for I saw him as I dressed coming up the drive. "Yes, we should have a full day today," he remarked, and he rubbed his hands with the joy of action. "Have you been on the moor already?" I asked. "I've sent a report from Grimpen to Princeton Prison as to the death of Selden. I think I can promise you that none of us will be troubled in the matter." "What is the next move?" I asked. "To see Sir Henry. Ah, here he is." "Good morning, Holmes," said Sir Henry. "You look like a general who's planning a battle." "That is the exact situation. Watson was asking for orders." "And so do I." "Very good. You are engaged, as I understand, to dine with our friends the Stapletons tonight." "Yes, and I hope that you will come also." "I fear that Watson and I must go to London." "To London?" The baronet's face perceptibly lengthened. "The hall and the moor are not very pleasant places when one is alone." "My dear fellow, you must trust me implicitly and do exactly what I tell you. You can tell your friends that urgent business required us to be in town. Will you remember to give them that message?" "Why, if you insist upon it." I saw by Sir Henry's clouded brow that he was deeply hurt by what he regarded as our desertion. "One more direction," said Holmes. "I wish you to drive to Merripit House. Send back your trap, however, and let them know that you intend to walk home." "To walk across the moor?" "Yes." "But that is the very thing which you have so often cautioned me not to do." "If I had not every confidence in your nerve and courage, I would not suggest it. But it is essential that you should do it." A couple of hours afterwards, we were at the station of Coombe Tracy and had dispatched the trap upon its return journey. As soon as it was gone, Holmes went to the station office, where a telegram awaited him. It ran, "Wire received, coming down with unsigned warrant. Arrive 5:40, Lestrade, Chief Inspector, New Scotland Yard." "Good. Now, Watson, I think we cannot employ our time better than by calling upon your acquaintance, Mrs. Laura Lyons." And to my complete amazement, he led me away from the station just as the London train approached. Mrs. Laura Lyons was in her office, and Sherlock Holmes opened his interview with a frankness and directness which considerably amazed her. "I am investigating the circumstances which attended the death of the late Sir Charles Baskerville. We regard this case as one of murder, and the evidence may implicate not only your friend Mr. Stapleton, but his wife as well." The lady sprang from her chair. "His wife?" "The person who has passed for his sister is really his wife," said Holmes. Mrs. Lyons resumed her seat. Her hands were grasping the arms of her chair, and I saw that the pink nails had turned white with the pressure of her grip. "His wife? His wife? Prove it to me. Prove it to me. And if you can do so—" The fierce flash of her eyes said more than any words. Holmes drew several papers from his pocket. "Here is a photograph of the couple taken in York 4 years ago. It is endorsed Mr. and Mrs. Vandeleur, but you will have no difficulty in recognizing him and her also, if you know her by sight. Here are 3 written descriptions by trustworthy witnesses of Mr. and Mrs. Vandeleur, who at the time kept St. Oliver's private school. Read them, and see if you can doubt the identity of these people." She glanced at them, and then looked up at us with the set, rigid face of a desperate woman. "Mr. Holmes, this man offered me marriage on condition that I could get a divorce from my husband. He has lied to me, the villain, in every conceivable way. Why should I try to shield him from the consequences of his own wicked acts? Ask me what you like, and there is nothing which I shall hold back. One thing I swear to you, and that is that when I wrote the letter I never dreamed of any harm to the old gentleman, who had been my kindest friend." "I entirely believe you, madam," said Sherlock Holmes. "Perhaps it will make it easier if I tell you what occurred, and you can check me if I make any material mistake. The sending of this letter was suggested by Stapleton. He dictated it. I presume that the reason he gave was that you would receive help from Sir Charles for the legal expenses connected with your divorce." "Exactly." "And then he dissuaded you from keeping the appointment." "He told me that it would hurt his self-respect that any other man should find the money for such an object, and that though he was a poor man himself, he would devote his last penny to removing the obstacles which divided us." "And then you heard nothing until you read the reports of the death in the paper?" "No." "And Stapleton made you swear to say nothing about your appointment with Sir Charles?" "He frightened me into remaining silent." "Quite so. But you had your suspicions." She hesitated and looked down. If he had kept faith with me, I should always have done so with him. At 5:45 that evening, the London Express came roaring into the station, and a small, wiry bulldog of a man sprang from a first-class carriage. "Anything good?" he asked. "The biggest for years," said Holmes. "We have 2 hours before we need to think of starting. I think we might employ it in getting some dinner, and then, Lestrade, we will take the London fog out of your throat by giving you a breath of the pure night air of Dartmoor." My nerves thrilled with anticipation when at last the cold wind upon our faces and the dark, void spaces on either side of the narrow road told me that we were back upon the moor once again. We passed Franklin's house and drew near to Baskerville Hall. We did not drive up to the door, but got down near the gate of the avenue. The wagonette was paid off, and we started to walk to Merripit House. "Are you armed, Lestrade?" The little detective smiled. "As long as I have my trousers, I have a hip pocket. And as long as I have a hip pocket, I have something in it." "Good. My friend and I are also ready for emergencies." "My word, it does not seem a very cheerful place," said the detective with a shiver, glancing round him at the gloomy slopes of the hill and at the huge lake of fog which lay over the Grimpen mire. "I see the lights of a house ahead of us. That is Merripit House." Holmes halted us when we were about 200 yards from it. "This will do. These rocks upon the right make an admirable screen." "We are to wait here?" said I. "Yes. Get into the hollow, Lestrade. You've been inside the house, have you not, Watson? What are those latticed windows at this end?" "I think they are the kitchen." "And the one beyond, which shines so brightly? Well, that is certainly the dining room. Creep forward quietly and see what they're doing, Watson." I tiptoed down the path and stooped behind the low wall which surrounded the orchard. Creeping in its shadow, I reached a point whence I could look straight through the uncurtained window. There were only 2 men in the room, Sir Henry and Stapleton. They sat with their profiles towards me on either side of the round table. As I watched them, Stapleton rose and left the room, while Sir Henry filled his glass and leaned back in his chair, puffing at his cigar. I heard the creak of a door and the crisp sound of boots upon gravel. The steps passed along the path on the other side of the wall under which I crouched. Looking over, I saw the naturalist pause at the door of an outhouse in the corner of the orchard. A key turned in a lock, and as he passed in, there was a curious scuffling noise from within. He was only a minute or so inside, and then I heard the key turn once more, and he passed me and re-entered the house. I crept quietly back to where my companions were waiting. Over the great Grimpen mire there hung a dense white fog. The moon shone on it, and it looked like a great shimmering ice field, with the heads of the distant tors as rocks borne upon its surface. "It's moving towards us, Watson." "Is that serious?" I replied. "Very serious indeed. Our success and even his life may depend upon his coming out before the fog is over the path." Before us lay the dark bulk of the house. Broad bars of golden light from the lower windows stretched across the orchard and the moor. Every minute, that white woolly plain which covered one half of the moor was drifting closer and closer to the house. The farther wall of the orchard was already invisible, and the trees were standing out of a swirl of white vapour. As we watched it, the fog wreaths came crawling round both corners of the house and rolled slowly into one dense bank. Holmes stamped his feet in his impatience. "If he isn't out in a quarter of an hour, the path will be covered." "Shall we move farther back upon higher ground?" I asked. "Yes, I think it would be as well." So, as the fog bank flowed onwards, we fell back before it, until we were half a mile from the house. And still that dense white sea swept slowly and inexorably on. "We are going too far," said Holmes. He dropped on his knees and clapped his ear to the ground. "Thank heaven! I think I can hear him coming." Crouching among the stones, we stared intently at the silver-tipped bank in front of us. Through the fog, as through a curtain, there stepped the man whom we were awaiting. He looked round him as he emerged into the clear starlit night. Then he came swiftly along the path, passed closely to where we lay, and went on up the long slope behind us. As he walked, he glanced continually over either shoulder. "Shh!" whispered Holmes, and I heard the sharp click of a cocking pistol. I was at Holmes's elbow, and I glanced for an instant at his face. His eyes were shining brightly in the moonlight. But suddenly they started forward in a rigid, fixed stare. At the same instant, Lestrade gave a yell of terror and threw himself face downwards upon the ground. I sprang to my feet, my inert hand grasping my pistol, my mind paralyzed by the dreadful shape which had sprung out upon us from the fog. A hound it was, an enormous coal-black hound, but not such a hound as mortal eyes have ever seen. Fire burst from its open mouth, its eyes glowed with a smouldering glare, its muzzle and hackles and dewlap were outlined in flickering flame. The huge black creature was leaping down the track, following hard upon the footsteps of our friend. So paralyzed were we by the apparition that we allowed it to pass before we'd recovered our nerve. Then Holmes and I both fired together, and the creature gave a hideous howl. He did not pause, however, but bounded onwards. Never have I seen a man run as Holmes ran that night. I am reckoned fleet of foot, but he outpaced me as much as I outpaced Lestrade. In front of us, we heard scream after scream from Sir Henry and the deep roar of the hound. I was in time to see the beast spring upon its victim, hurl him to the ground, and lunge at his throat. But the next instant, Holmes had emptied 5 barrels of his revolver into the creature's flank. With a last howl of agony and a vicious snap in the air, it rolled upon its back, 4 feet pawing furiously, and then fell limp upon its side. The giant hound was dead. Sir Henry lay insensible where he had fallen. We tore away his collar, and Holmes breathed a prayer of gratitude when we saw that there was no sign of a wound. Already our friend's eyelids shivered, and he made a feeble effort to move. Lestrade thrust his brandy flask between the baronet's teeth, and 2 frightened eyes were looking up at us. "My God! What was it? What in heaven's name was it?" "It's dead, whatever it is," said Holmes. "We've laid the family ghost once and forever." In size and strength, it was a terrible creature. It was not a pure bloodhound, and it was not a pure mastiff, but it appeared to be a combination of the two, gaunt, savage, and as large as a small lioness. Even now, in the stillness of death, the huge jaws seemed to be dripping with a bluish flame, and the small, deep-set, cruel eyes were ringed with fire. I placed my hand upon its glowing muzzle, and as I held them up, my own fingers smouldered and gleamed in the darkness. "It's phosphorus," I said. "Yes, and a cunning preparation of it," said Holmes, sniffing at the dead animal. "There is no smell which might have interfered with his power of scent. We owe you a deep apology, Sir Henry, for having exposed you to this fright. I was prepared for a hound, but not for such a creature as this, and the fog gave us little time to receive him." "You have saved my life," said the baronet. "Having first endangered it. Are you strong enough to stand?" We helped him to a rock, where he sat shivering with his face buried in his hands. "We must leave you now," said Holmes. "The rest of our work must be done, and every moment is of importance." We retraced our steps swiftly down the path to the house. The front door was open, so we rushed in and hurried from room to room, to the amazement of a manservant who met us in the passage. No sign could we see of the man whom we were chasing. On the upper floor, however, one of the bedroom doors was locked. A faint moaning came from within. Holmes struck the door just over the lock with the flat of his foot, and it flew open. Pistol in hand, we all 3 rushed in. In the centre of this room there was an upright beam, a support for the timber which spanned the roof. To this post a figure was tied, swathed and muffled in sheets which had been used to secure it. In a minute we had torn off the gag, unswathed the bonds, and Mrs. Stapleton sank upon the floor in front of us. As her beautiful head fell upon her chest, I saw the clear red wheal of a whiplash across her neck. "The brute!" cried Holmes. "Here, Lestrade, your brandy bottle. Put her in the chair. She's fainted." She opened her eyes. "Is he safe? Sir Henry, is he safe?" "Yes, said Holmes.
"And the hound?"
"It is dead."
"Thank God, thank God! Oh, this villain! See how he has treated me!"
She shot her arms out from her sleeves, and we saw with horror they were all mottled with bruises.
"I could endure it all, as long as I could still cling to the hope that I had his love. But now I know that in this also I had been his dupe and his tool."
She broke into a passionate sobbing as she spoke. "Tell us then where we shall find him," said Holmes. "If you have ever aided him in evil, help us now and so atone."
"There is but one place where he can have fled. There is an old tin mine on an island in the heart of the mire. It was there that he kept his hound, and there also he made his preparations, so that he might have a refuge. That is where he would fly."
The fog bank lay like white wool against the window. Holmes held the lamp towards it. "See," said he, "no one could find his way into the Grimpen mire tonight." She laughed and clapped her hands. Her eyes and teeth gleamed with fierce merriment.
"He may find his way in," she cried. "If he could see the guiding wands, we planted them together, he and I, to mark the pathway through the mire. Oh, if I could have only plucked them out today, then indeed you would have him at your mercy."
In the morning the fog had lifted, and we were guided by Mrs. Stapleton to the point where they had found a pathway through the bog. A small wand planted here and there showed where the path zigzagged from tuft to tuft of rushes among those green-scummed pits and foul quagmires which barred the way to the stranger. An odour of decay and heavy vapour enveloped us, while a false step plunged us more than once thigh-deep into the dark, quivering mire, which shook for yards in the soft undulations around our feet. Once only we saw a trace that someone had passed that perilous way before us. Amid a tuft of cotton grass some dark thing was projecting. Holmes sank to his waist as he stepped from the path to seize it, and had we not been there to drag him out, he could never have set his foot upon firm land again. He held an old black boot. Myers, Toronto, was printed on the leather inside. "It is our friend Sir Henry's missing boot," said Holmes. "Thrown there by Stapleton in his flight," said I. "Exactly. He retained it in his hand after using it to set the hound upon Sir Henry's track. He fled when he knew the game was up, still clutching it. We know at least that he came this far in safety." There was no chance of finding footsteps in the mire, for the rising mud oozed swiftly in upon them. But as we at last reached firmer ground beyond the morass, we all looked eagerly for them. But no slightest sign of them ever met our eyes. If the earth told a true story, then Stapleton never reached that island of refuge towards which he struggled through the fog upon the last night. Somewhere in the foul slime of this huge morass which had sucked him in, this cold and cruel-hearted man is forever buried. Many traces we found of him in the bog-girt island where he had hid his savage ally. A huge driving wheel and a shaft, half filled with rubbish, showed the position of an abandoned mine. Beside it were the crumbling remains of the cottages of the miners. In one of these, a staple and chain with a quantity of gnawed bones showed where the animal had been confined. "He could hide his hound," said Holmes, "but he could not hush its voice, and hence came those cries which even in daylight were not pleasant to hear. On an emergency, he could keep the hound in the outhouse at Merriput, but it was always a risk, and it was only on the supreme day, which he regarded as the end of all his efforts, that he dared to do it. This paste in the tin is no doubt more of the luminous phosphorus mixture with which the creature was daubed. No wonder the poor devil of a convict ran and screamed when he saw such a creature bounding through the darkness of the moor upon his track." It was the end of November, and Holmes and I sat on either side of a blazing fire in our sitting-room in Baker Street. Sir Henry and Dr. Mortimer were in London. They had called upon us that very afternoon, so it was natural that the subject should come up for discussion. "The family portrait did not lie," explained Holmes. "That fellow Stapleton was indeed a Baskerville. He was a son of Roger Baskerville, the younger brother of Sir Charles, who fled with a sinister reputation to South America. Stapleton, as I shall continue to call him, married Beryl Garcia, one of the beauties of Costa Rica, and having purloined a considerable sum of public money, he changed his name to Vandeleur and fled to England, where he established a school in the east of Yorkshire. The school, which had begun well, sank from disrepute to infamy. The Vandeleurs found it convenient to change their name to Stapleton, and he brought his taste for entomology to the south of England. The fellow had evidently made inquiry and found that only 2 lives intervened between him and the valuable Baskerville estate. When he went to Devonshire, his plans were, I believe, exceedingly hazy, but that he meant mischief from the first is evident from the way in which he took his wife with him in the character of his sister. His first act was to establish himself as near to his ancestral home as he could, and his second was to cultivate a friendship with Sir Charles Baskerville and with the neighbours. Sir Charles himself told him about the legend of the Hound of the Baskervilles, and so prepared the way for his own death. Stapleton knew that the old man's heart was weak, and that a shock would kill him. So much he learned from Dr. Mortimer. Having conceived the idea, he proceeded to carry it out with considerable finesse. An ordinary schemer would have been content to work with a savage hound. The use of artificial means to make the creature look so diabolical was a flash of genius upon his part. Having killed Sir Charles, it is possible that Stapleton did not know of the existence of an heir in Canada. In any case, he would very soon learn of it from his friend Dr. Mortimer, and he was told all the details about the arrival of Henry Baskerville. Stapleton's first idea was that this young stranger from Canada might possibly be done to death in London without coming down to Devonshire at all. He lodged, I find, at the Mexborough Private Hotel in Craven Street. Here he kept his wife imprisoned in her room, while he, disguised in a beard, followed Dr. Mortimer to Baker Street and afterwards to the station and to the Northumberland Hotel. His wife had some inkling of his plans, but she had such a fear of her husband, a fear founded upon brutal treatment, that she dare not write to warn the man, whom she knew to be in danger. Eventually, she adopted the expedient of cutting out of the Times the words which would form the message, and addressing the letter in a disguised hand. It was very essential for Stapleton to get some article of Sir Henry's attire, so that in case he was driven to use the Hound, he might always have the means of setting him upon his track. We cannot doubt that the boot boy at Sir Henry's hotel was well bribed to help him in this design. By chance, however, the first boot which was procured for him was a new one, and therefore useless for his purpose. He then had it returned and obtained another, a most instructive incident, since it proved conclusively to my mind that we were dealing with a real hound, as no other supposition could explain this anxiety to obtain an old boot and this indifference to a new one. The Stapletons then went down to Devonshire, whither they were soon followed by Sir Henry and you. It was my game to watch Stapleton, and I came down secretly when I was supposed to be in London. And by the time that you discovered me upon the moor, I had a complete knowledge of the whole business, but I had not a case which could go to jury. There seemed to be no alternative but to catch Stapleton red-handed, and to do so we had to use Sir Henry as bait. We did so, and at the cost of a severe shock to our client, we succeeded in completing our case and driving Stapleton to his destruction. "There only remains one difficulty," I complained. "If Stapleton had succeeded in killing Sir Henry, how could he explain the fact that he, the next Baskerville heir, had been living unannounced under another name so close to the property? How could he claim it without causing suspicion and inquiry?" "Ah," said Holmes, "there were 3 possible courses. He might return to South America, claim the property from there, establish his identity before the British authorities there, and so obtain the fortune without coming to England at all. Or he might adopt an elaborate disguise during the short time that he need be in London. Or again, he might furnish an accomplice with the proofs and papers, putting him in as heir and retaining a claim upon his income. We cannot doubt, from what we know of him, that he would have found some way out of the difficulty. And now, my dear Watson, I think we may turn our thoughts into more pleasant channels. I have a box tonight for Les Huguenots. Might I trouble you to be ready in half an hour, and we can stop at Marcini's for a little dinner on the way.